Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome to the channel. This Saturday, we are getting Dustin Poirier versus Justin Gaethje 2 for the BMF title. And that absolutely pains me to say BMF title because it's so cringy and so corny. And I wasn't going to make a video just outright trashing the BMF title. We kind of talked about it when this was initially announced. But then somebody sent me a clip of Jon Anik discussing the BMF title at the UFC 291 press conference. And I'm like, you know what? I have to make this video now because this statement from Jon Anik was so cringy and so corny. And then the UFC's getting no backlash from it. There's no media backlash. There's no backlash really at all. The fans aren't really having any backlash because this is a casual fan's belt. And then the hardcore fans are like, oh, well, I just love Poirier versus Gaichie too. I don't care about the belt. But this is honestly a slippery slope that could literally ruin the sport as we know it. So I want to discuss it in the video. And also, I feel like there's a master plan with the BMF belt that the UFC has had all along since they announced UFC 291. And I feel like it's so clear. And I can see it from 20 million miles away. And I've discussed it in some live streams, but I wanted to put it into a video because I want some actual video evidence when this eventually ends up coming to fruition. So we're going to discuss the master plan in this video as well. And also, I want to talk about the lineage of the BMF title because there's a lot of newer fans who maybe just started watching in the last 1, 2, or 3 years, and they don't even know how the BMF belt originated. So we're going to talk about that in this video as well. And honestly, the more I start to rehash the origin of the BMF belt, I was like, this sounds really hilarious when you say it out loud. It makes the belt even more laughable and makes it even more the owner of that belt an absolute fraud. So if you go back, the origins of the BMF belt can be linked back to UFC 239 back in July of 2019. Jorge Masvidal brutally flying knees Ben Askren, 5-second KO into the first round. And Jorge Masvidal, people knew who he was. He wasn't anything close to a star at this point in time. But because of this viral KO, and because of the trash talk leading up to this fight, Jorge Masvidal was propelled into superstardom. That KO was everywhere. Everyone couldn't believe how the 5-second KO, a flying knee KO, he just ran across the cage and landed the first knee through and then knocked him unconscious, and then landed follow-up shots, and the media asked him about it in the post-fight presser, and he said those were super necessary, and that kind of blew up as well. And all of a sudden, people knew who Jorge Masvidal was. Instead of being kind of, you know, a veteran of the UFC who the hardcores knew from Strikeforce, all of a sudden, casual fans were starting to rally behind Jorge Masvidal. And then you have Nate Diaz. Nate Diaz had sat out since 2016 at UFC 202 was the last time he fought against Conor McGregor. And he returned a month later against Anthony Pettis at UFC 241. A month later after Jorge Masvidal got the KO. And he fights Anthony Pettis. And this whole time, essentially, Nate Diaz was saying, you know, he worded it a different way, and I like Nate Diaz a lot, but essentially what Nate Diaz was saying is, I don't want to fight any grapplers. I don't want to fight any grapplers. He was saying, you know, I'm looking for people who are on my level, who have put in the time, but really he just didn't want to fight anybody who was going to wrestle him. So he fights Anthony Pettis. He beats Anthony Pettis at UFC 241, and on the mic afterwards, Nate Diaz, people think he's dumb. He's not as dumb as he seems. He's a smart guy, and he's actually a decent businessman as well. And he planned that going into that fight. So I'm going to call out Jorge Masvidal. Because Jorge Masvidal, primarily a striker, similar situation to me where he doesn't want to be grappled. And guess what? Now he's a star because he just got this crazy flying knee KO over Ben Askren. So he calls out Jorge Masvidal on the mic at UFC 241 and essentially goes on to say, let's find out who's the BMF. And Dana White's like, oh, let's run with this. Let's run for this. Let's run with this. And what happened is originally at UFC 244 in November 2019, the UFC was originally trying to make Kamaru Usman versus Colby Covington 1. Now, I don't remember the exact situation, but for whatever reason, I think it was Colby who could not fight on that card, or there was contract negotiations. For whatever reason, Usman versus Covington 1 did not come to fruition at UFC 244. And this was the Madison Square Garden card where the UFC really likes to have a massive card. So the UFC's like, oh, what are we going to do? We need a title to put on the line. We don't have a title to put on the line. We need a big fight card. And they were like, let's do Nate Diaz versus Jorge Masvidal, and let's make a fantasy belt, the BMF title. And when this was initially announced, I thought it was corny. I thought it was cringy. I thought it was WWE-esque. But Dana came out and said, look, this is a one-time thing. And I said, okay, it's not that bad. I actually bought tickets and went to UFC 244. I watched that card live at Madison Square Garden. I paid a ridiculous amount for my tickets. And I was like, okay, it's just a one-time thing. It's corny, but the card's stacked. You know, we got all these great fights on the card. I'm going to go see it. And I didn't really care about the BMF belt that much. I didn't like it all that much, but it wasn't like something that was really annoying. Well, anyway, Jorge Masvidal wins the fight over Nate Diaz via doctor stoppage. And I didn't necessarily love the doctor stoppage, but it was a nasty cut. I didn't hate it. And I saw all I needed to see. I thought Jorge Masvidal was clearly going to win that fight. But I thought to myself, I said, talk about the least BMF way to win a championship. To win by doctor stoppage, that's BMF. And you just have the whole UFC 244, the entire atmosphere. I went to the press conference for UFC 245 where The Rock came out and announced the movie talking about like he's gonna role play a former MMA fighter, and that, you know, nobody even cheered at all. It was crickets, and you had fake media members asking him about the movie. I actually searched up that movie a couple months ago when this fight was announced, and you know what? They never even made that movie. I mean, I can guess based on the fan reaction at the press conference that day. But anyway, they had The Rock trot out the belt at UFC 244, and he threw it up WWE style, and then he wrapped it around Jorge Masvidal's waist, and it was just, I mean, by the moment at UFC 244, as I'm living in these moments, I'm like, this is getting cornier and cornier and cornier, but guess what? Now it's over. I'm like, oh, it's over. We're never going to have to hear about it again. It's never going to happen again. Dana White says it's a one-off. Not that I take his word for it, but I'm like, there's no way they're going to keep doing this. Well, then Jorge Masvidal goes on to fight Kamaru Usman at UFC 251 the following July, loses to Kamaru Usman. Then he sits out for a while. He ends up getting another title shot against Kamaru Usman because they were like, oh, well, he had that on short notice because they had negotiating issues for UFC 251. Gilbert Burns was supposed to fight Usman, and then Gilbert Burns pulled out last minute. So then they gave the fight back to Masvidal and paid him what he wanted. So then you had the short notice excuse for 251. So then they were like, oh, we're going to open back up to an arena. At UFC 261 was the first pay-per-view back with fans. We need a big fight card. And Jorge Masvidal, even though he had lost to Kamaru Usman, he had only lost via decision, and people were making the excuse short notice. So he fights Kamaru Usman again at UFC 261 back in April of 2021, gets flatline KO'd, just brutally KO'd, and it was nasty. Kamaru Usman damn near took his head off. And then what happens to Jorge after that? He sits out for another year. He comes back and he fights Colby Covington, gets 50-45 at UFC 272. And then he comes back in April of this year at UFC 287, gets 30-27 by Gilbert Burns. And then he finally retires on a 4-fight losing streak and literally did not win a single round in that 4-fight losing streak, which is crazy. And he finally retires. He's like, you know what? I'm done. I ain't what I used to be. And you could clearly tell his skill set had diminished. And I'm like, okay, now we don't have to hear, because he was kind of parading his BMF belt around because he was like, oh, a belt I never have to defend? Great. I can lose 18 fights in a row and it doesn't matter. And I thought, really, when Jorge Masvidal finally retired at UFC 287, I said, that's the end of the BMF talk. We don't ever have to hear about it again. Well, here comes UFC 291 announcement. Dustin Poirier versus Justin Gaethje for the BMF title. The rematch. It's the rematch between the two for the BMF title. And they announced it the same day Francis Ngannou came out with his groundbreaking deal from PFL, record-breaking heavyweight deal. And, you know, I hated it initially. And I understand. You look at Dustin Poirier, okay? I get it. Dustin Poirier's fight against Michael Chandler was insane. It was fun. The loss to Charles Oliveira was insane. It was fun. The fight against Conor McGregor at 264, amazing fight, exciting fight. The fight before that finished Conor McGregor, amazing fight. The fight before that against Dan Hooker, great fight. Dustin Poirier's resume speaks for itself. He is one of the best lightweights of all time and one of the most exciting fighters in UFC history, period. Justin Gaethje, same thing. Fight against Rafael Fiziev, amazing fight. Fight before that, even though it was a loss against Charles Oliveira, great fight. Fight against Michael Chandler was one of the best fights of 2021. You know, fight against Tony Ferguson, he stepped on short notice, beat the brakes off of Tony Ferguson. And then you go back to his other fights, he's either having crazy finishes or crazy fights. The UFC debut against Michael Johnson was insane. He had the loss to Eddie Alvarez, that was an insane fight. The original fight with Dustin Poirier, that was an insane fight. And Justin Gaethje, elite level lightweight fighter, and one of the most violent fighters in the UFC and one of the most exciting fighters in the UFC. So I understand they're like, oh, we have two former interim lightweight champions. We have two fan favorites. And we have two guys who don't like to grapple. They primarily like to strike, and they always put on fan-friendly performances. So like, oh, you know what? Let's throw on the BMF belt on the line. Let's throw it on the line. And I'm like, okay, but what's the point? We don't need it. Both of these guys are still at the top of their game. Both of these guys are literally in title contention with a win over each other. Why do we have to throw a belt on the line? And I talked about this in my previous video. It was kind of the main point of my previous video. But essentially, ESPN, their agreement with the UFC, because basically ESPN takes all the pay-per-view revenue in, and ESPN pays the UFC a flat rate per year. ESPN, in their contract agreement with the UFC, there must be a title on the line, unless there's some type of exemption because it's maybe Conor McGregor. It's going to sell over 1 million pay-per-view buys. There must be a title on the line. So that's why the UFC put the BMF title on the line here. But there's just so many problems I have with it. There's so many problems with it. It is WWE-esque, and it's a slippery slope. Honestly, it will literally ruin the sport as we know it if we keep throwing these types of belts on the line. Are we going to have an hardcore belt? Are we going to have an intercontinental belt? What's next? Ladder matches, elimination chamber, cage matches? We're going to have Hornswoggle hiding under the cage with a shillelagh? I mean, seriously. This is so cringy and corny, and it's gimmicky. What happened to... That's not what we do here. Dana White talking about a potential Francis Ngannou Tyson Fury boxing match. Oh, that's a gimmick. That's not what we do here. And then literally a couple days later, you're announcing a BMF title, a fake title. And honestly, I got all my anger out of the way initially when this was announced, but then I heard Jon Anik. Jon Anik at the press conference. Somebody sent me this clip. I wish I could unsee it. But Jon Anik was asked a question about hyping up the card, and he said something along the lines of, and I'll tag the press conference and the timestamp down in the description. I don't want to put it in the video because they'll probably copyright strike me. But he said, if you had to go through this entire roster and try to find two BMFs, it's hard not to settle on these two guys. And he actually said, if you had to go through this entire roster and look for the two baddest motherfuckers, it's hard to say you wouldn't settle on these guys. He actually said it. And the UFC can't say it. They just say BMF usually in all the promotional material and all the lead up. But Anik actually said it at the press conference. And I'm like, that is so cringy. And also it's outright false. You're selling wolf tickets. Oh, if you had to look through the entire roster, these are the two BMFs. Okay, well, let's take a look at Dustin Poirier's recent fights. Oh, UFC 269, he got finished by Charles Oliveira. Got submitted rear naked choke in the third round. If that referee wasn't there, guess what? Dustin Poirier would be dead. He's the BMF now. Charles Oliveira's still fighting. You go back to UFC 242, September 2019. Got destroyed by Khabib Nurmagomedov. Got finished in this third round as well. Rear naked choke. And I know Khabib's not on the roster, but guess who is? And guess who's the current champion? Islam Makhachev. Similar style to Khabib. I know they're not identical in styles, but still, it got brutally choked out by Khabib Nurmagomedov. One of the deepest rear naked chokes I've ever seen in my entire life. Then you look at Justin Gaethje's resume. I mean, almost exactly the same. One fight ago, before Fiziev, guess what? He got submitted by Charles Oliveira. He got dropped and submitted by Charles Oliveira. If that ref is not there, Justin Gaethje is dead right now. Charles Oliveira choked him unconscious and killed him. Okay? And then you go back 2 fights before that. Oh, he fought Khabib Nurmagomedov as well. Got finished by Khabib Nurmagomedov as well. So if I had to go through the roster and I had to pick out a BMF, it damn sure ain't either one of these guys. And Jon Anik's selling wolf tickets saying, yeah, these guys are the BMFs. They're two of the baddest motherfuckers ever. What that is code word for is essentially that these guys are strikers. Oh, these guys don't like to grapple. I thought they were promoting the sport of MMA. I didn't think they were trying to promote boxing. I love the mixture of jiu-jitsu, the mixture of wrestling, the mixture of clinch work and kickboxing. You know, we're all of a sudden now you guys just want to be basically a boxing promotion. Is that what you're saying? You want to be the BMF. That's what they're saying. Poirier and Gaichie don't like to grapple. That is what they're saying here. And it's a slippery slope. It really is a slippery slope. Because if you start adding more and more different belts and making up more opportunities just to fill cards, and the fans start accepting this, and the media just starts accepting it, guess what? They're going to continue to do it. This will keep going on. There used to be a day and age, if you are a long-time UFC fan, you know this. And let me know down in the comments if you are. There used to be a day and age where it was a rarity to have an interim belt. Interim belt, oh my, someone would have to get in a crazy car accident and break both their legs for them to do an interim belt. Now it's like, interim belt for you, interim belt for you, interim belt for you. Like almost like Oprah giving out, prizes on her show. That's what it is nowadays. And now all of a sudden, they're not only giving out interim belts, they're giving out BMF belts. Well, the BMF, if you really want to get into it, I know Jorge Masvidal technically retired with the BMF belt, but that's not even true. Jorge Masvidal lost to Kamaru Usman. Who did Kamaru Usman lose to? Oh, he lost to Leon Edwards. So guess what? Leon Edwards is the lineal BMF right now. So it's right there with the undisputed title. The undisputed title is supposed to be the best fighter in that weight class. And now you're just making a random silver belt to just plug into certain main events to have a title in line for no reason. It's just so dumb. And you know what's also interesting? If you think about it, you look at every fighter that's ever been in a BMF title fight. You have Jorge Masvidal. He's had 2 title shots, lost both of them. You look at Nate Diaz. He was in a BMF title fight, didn't win. He has had 1 title shot, lost it against Benson Henderson. Oh, you look at Dustin Poirier. He's had 2 undisputed title shots, lost both of them. You look at Justin Gaethje, 2 undisputed title shots, lost both of them. The fighters who are participating in the BMF title fights are 0-7 in undisputed title fights. So this is literally second best, even if that. This is a fraudulent title. And I think for Dustin Poirier or Justin Gaethje to parade around with a BMF title around their waist, I think it's an embarrassment to both of them. Honestly, I think it's a slap in the face to both of them. Both Justin Gaethje and Dustin Poirier, I don't know if they're just keeping their mouth shut because they're getting paid for this fight. And, they're like, okay, well, I'll just add this to my resume. I'm a BMF champion. But neither one of these guys even like to having the interim belt, especially Justin Gaethje. Now, all of a sudden, you're telling me you're going to wrap that BMF belt around your waist and be like, yeah, I'm really happy about being second best, maybe third best, maybe fourth. I don't know. Because honestly, the BMF belt is essentially the mediocre belt of guys who can't grapple. That's basically what it is. Wrapping that BMF belt around your waist is just saying, I don't have any takedown defense, I don't have any jiu-jitsu, and I can't stop a submission attack, especially a rear naked choke. That's essentially what the BMF title is. It's an embarrassment. I wouldn't want to wrap that thing around my waist. So I don't understand. I guess maybe these guys are hiding their true feelings about it because they don't want to attempt to delegitimize the fight. But this is delegitimizing. This is an attempt to delegitimize the undisputed title. And casual fans, I know some of them are going to eat this up. But at the end of the day, Dustin Poirier versus Justin Gaethje 2 sells itself. Jan Blachowicz versus Alex Pereira sells itself. We don't need some silver belt with the letters BMF on it. Baddest motherfucker. You're not the baddest. You're not the baddest. Islam Makhachev is right now. Leon Edwards is right now. Israel Adesanya is right now. There's no light heavyweight champion. John Jones is right now. They're the BMF of their divisions because they are the actual champions. So why are we making up these fantasy titles? These are WWE titles. It's going to ruin the sport. And I truly believe that the master plan with all this, and I'm telling you right now, I can smell it a mile away. I can see it a mile away. The true motives here, the UFC's thinking, eventually we're going to have Conor McGregor fight for the BMF title. Because Conor McGregor, most likely he's never fighting for an undisputed title again. And if he does, he's probably not going to win that. I mean, honestly, I don't even see Conor McGregor beating Dustin Poirier. I don't see him beating Justin Gaethje right now. But at least those matchups are more possible or more winnable for McGregor than a potential Leon Edwards fight at welterweight or an Islam Makhachev fight at lightweight. He ain't winning those fights. So the UFC's like, oh, let's introduce a WWE fairy tale belt, and then we can have Conor McGregor fight for it in a year, because we know Conor McGregor, he's still taking PEDs and banned substances, and he's not even in the USADA testing pool, and he's probably never fighting Michael Chandler. Honestly, as much as Michael Chandler wants Conor McGregor to take him into an NBA Finals bathroom, public restroom, I just don't think Conor's going to do it. Conor doesn't want to fight Chandler. He doesn't want to fight Chandler. So he's probably just going to sit out. He's going to keep pumping himself full of PEDs. Eventually, he might finally rejoin the USADA pool. And then you know what he's going to say? He's going to say, I want Dustin Poirier. I wouldn't have lost that last fight if I wouldn't have broke my leg. If I didn't break my leg in that fight, I would have won that matchup. I want the 4th fight with Dustin Poirier. Or he's going to talk about, oh, Justin Gaethje's been talking about me, because Justin Gaethje's kind of been, going off about Conor over the past few years. He's going to say, you know what, I want Justin Gaethje because I want my hands on that BMF title. Conor's always talked about, I want the welterweight belt, I want this belt, I want 3 division champion. You know he's going to say he wants the BMF title. And Conor is smart enough to know his limits. That's why when he returned a while ago, he decided to fight Cowboy Cerrone instead of Justin Gaethje. He knows, okay, I'm not going to win against Leon Edwards. I'm not going to win against Islam Makhachev. I'm not going to win against Colby Covington if Colby Covington potentially dethrones Leon Edwards. But I have a chance. There's a chance to beat Dustin Poirier, and there's a chance to beat Justin Gaethje. So honestly, the BMF title is just a fraudulent belt. It's just a fraudulent belt. And even if they don't end up making Conor McGregor fight for that belt, now we have another belt you can't lose. What is the point of that? What is the point of even making this belt if it's not going to be defended? At least make them defend it. Make them defend it like the hardcore belt. Here's where I would be okay with the BMF title. Make the BMF title. This is actually a great idea. I literally just came up with this during the video. This is a great idea. Make the BMF title. You can be the BMF champ. You have to fight every 8 weeks. You don't fight every 8 weeks, you relinquish the belt on to the next potential BMF title fight. And as soon as you win that belt, you have to just keep defending and keep defending and keep defending against whoever's challenging you. I want it like the hardcore belt, anywhere, anytime. I don't care where it is. UFC, Apex, Las Vegas, T-Mobile Arena. I don't care. Make the BMF champion defend every 8 weeks. Otherwise, they're stripped and they vacate the belt. That would actually be mildly interesting to me. But instead, we're just going to have, a fake fantasy belt that's made with 3 letters on it, BMF, and it's silver, and we're just going to parade around, and we can't lose it unless, this fight's really interesting. Let's use it to promote this fight. It's just stupid. It's just corny. It's just cringy. It's just WWE-esque, and I absolutely hate it. And honestly, for me, it puts a damper on UFC 291. It reminds me of literally the yellow canvas at UFC 200. The yellow canvas, that piss yellow canvas at UFC 200 ruined the event for me. And honestly, it might sound crazy to you guys. I'm not as excited for UFC 291 as I could be if it wasn't for this cringy, corny BMF title. Because really, if you've been watching the sport long enough, you know how this stuff just keeps rolling and rolling and rolling. Conor McGregor versus Floyd Mayweather, I think, really did a lot of damage to the sport. Because all of a sudden, every fighter in the UFC, all of a sudden, I want to fight a boxer. I want to get a boxing payday. And it had a lasting impact on the sport in a negative way, at least from a fan's perspective. And I just see this BMF title now. We've accepted it. The media's accepted it. The fans have accepted it. Now, all of a sudden, it's going to become commonplace. Next thing you know, intercontinental belt, tag team belts, whatever the UFC can think of, they're going to start throwing on the line, and I absolutely hate it. But let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Don't forget to like the video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and thank you so much for watching.